Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic, let's do it. What was a safety measure that was thought to help but actually made things worse? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Banning kegs of beer on my college campus for tailgates, everyone started bulk buying cheap vodka instead. A student got a head injury doing a keg stand, and they wanted to make things safer. Stupid college kids are better off drinking light beer than they are slugging grape-flavored shitty vodka. When the Deepwater Horizon oil rig blew up and dumped crude oil into the Gulf of Mexico, the chemical Corexit was used to disperse it. Turns out, it was about 10 times worse than the crude oil itself, and also caused the oil to just sink to the bottom of the Gulf, where it poisoned the entire food web. Thalidomide. It is a drug that was prescribed in Germany, I think, to pregnant mothers to help with nausea. It caused terrible deformities in the children, arms or legs that were almost stubs with flipper-like things instead of hands or feet. Safety box cutters, where the user has to keep pressure on the button to keep the blade extended, otherwise it automatically retracts back into the handle. People end up straining awkwardly to hold them and focus more on keeping the blade open rather than what they're trying to cut. So there's more accidents. I've got a story. So I rented a car and I'm driving with the dash display map showing me where to go since I'm unfamiliar, fast 2-lane winding roads and a complicated route. Suddenly the screen blanks out with a massive red message, warning, with a long small print message underneath. I try to read what it says, nearly driving off the road, but finally get to where I can pull over to read it. In small letters under the giant red warning it reads, "Taking your eyes off the road for too long while using the system could cause a crash, resulting in injury or death to you or others." Nice. Telling parents not to expose young children to peanuts because it might cause a peanut allergy. This meant young children were not exposed to peanuts at all, and later in life, when they did come across peanuts, their bodies thought it was a foreign object and became allergic. Overvigilance in forest fire protection leads to buildup of burnable materials and hotter, more destructive fires were the result. Not exactly safety related, but there is a thing called the cobra effect about a change causing the opposite effect. The British went to India, where there are many cobras. The British were kind of freaked out by the cobras and wanted them gone, so they offered a bounty on cobra heads. They assumed that the Indian folk would kill cobras for the bounty, and then there would be fewer cobras. But instead, some folks started breeding cobras in basements in order to farm the bounty. A few cobras would always escape, thus the number of cobras nearly actually increased. So the British figured out that this was because of the cobra bounty, and they canceled the bounty, assuming this would bring things back to normal. So now the folks threw all the worthless cobras out of their basements, which increased the number of cobras nearly again. Every change the British made in an effort to decrease the number of cobras actually caused more cobras repeatedly. That time, a UK swimming pool forced a one-child, one-adult policy, meaning moms with more than one kid couldn't go at the kids' hour during the week when the dads were at work. The intention was to prevent drownings. The pool had never had a drowning. The result was kids didn't learn how to swim and drowned at other swimming venues. The Four Pests campaign as part of the Great Leap Forward campaign by Chairman Mao Zedong of the CCP. It labeled sparrows as being a pest affecting food production and storage because they were believed to consume substantial quantities of grain. The other pests were rats, flies, and mosquitoes, and they were targeted to mitigate the spread of disease. The Great Leap Forward campaign was supposed to quickly advance the country from an agrarian society to an industrialist communist society after the end of the Chinese Civil War. Because of the mass killings of sparrows as well as disruption of the surrounding environment through loud noises, which led them leaving areas of human habitation, led to a massive boom in locust populations, which, alongside poor agricultural policies and techniques and poor government management regarding the campaign, led to a large famine that is estimated to have caused the deaths of 15 to 55 million people. 5-point harnesses in track day cars without hands device. By preventing the airbags from softening the head in a crash, the head, along with the added weight of the helmet, makes your neck the weakest link. Lots of auto clubs require a hands-type device now that so many people have been injured this way. There was a law passed to make CEO pay public. It was meant to promote transparency and accountability. CEO pay has since skyrocketed because now they compete with other CEO salaries. Breathalyzers in bars, meant to show people how intoxicated they were so they would not drive. Instead, people got more drunk because they would try and see who could blow the highest. Bill Hicks, George Bush says that we are losing the war against drugs. Do you know what that implies? There's a war going on, and the people who are on drugs are winning. Well, what does that tell you about drugs? There are some smart, creative motherfuckers on that side. They're winning a war, and they're dumb. Belt conveyors that carry very dusty material used to be very hazardous to work around due to the amount of dust they generated. As OSHA became more focused on cracking down on respirable dust hazards in the 1960s, it became commonplace to put guarding and sheeting up around the belt conveyors in an attempt to contain the dust and give the employees a safer work environment. Putting up the guards made accessing the conveyor pulleys for maintenance extremely difficult, so they were usually left to run to the point of failure. When conveying combustible dust, a hot bearing is a very easy source for combustion. An enclosed belt conveyor is an environment filled with fuel floating in the air in concentrations that are easily ignited. There have been dozens of cases of industrial explosions due to this scenario. Imperial Sugar in 2008 was a perfect example. Enclosed conveyors with hot bearings start an initial explosion. That explosion propagated down the conveyor enclosure to whatever is next down the line. In that case, it was the packaging area of the plant filled with huge bins full of sugar. 14 people were killed when the pack house went off. Thankfully nowadays, you see the explosive materials conveyed pneumatically, where you have a much better control in preventing explosive conditions. The Patriot Act. Ugh. This insane amount of privacy invasion and extra powers that were granted to federal and local law enforcement that have never been rescinded far outweighs any good, read none, that the Patriot Act was supposed to deliver. Yeah, I mean, obviously that's a hot button topic for me. You talk about the Patriot Act, and I know it was an emotional time for everyone post 9/11, but every Congress has since voted to extend the rights of the Patriot Act. So are we still in a state of emergency from a terrorist threat, from Al-Qaeda? I don't know, but they certainly love to read our emails, including probably listening to this right now. Hi. During World War II, the Allies needed a way to make their tanks waterproof, so no water would leak in during a beach landing as they sent their tanks into the water to support the troop landing. They used paint mixed with a chemical that did the trick, polytetrafluoroethylene, which was discovered by American company DuPont in 1938. After the war, DuPont thought the chemical was too useful to go to waste. They had plans to put it in the homes of every middle-class family. Along came Teflon pots and pans. During the 50s, Teflon was rather popular. Their no-stick pans made cooking just that much easier for a low price. Sometime around the 1970s, numerous employees responsible for cleaning the large vats with chemicals within started getting horribly sick, different forms of cancer that developed quickly and were fatal. Most of these workers were women, some were pregnant. Almost all babies of these workers in contact with the chemical were born with all kinds of life-changing birth defects. Testing ensued, and it was discovered that the chemical used was carcinogenic, a very serious risk for cancer. They had their results from testing during the mid-70s. They swept it under the rug completely, and not only kept using the chemical commercially and otherwise, but they consistently dumped the chemical waste in various rivers and dumping grounds. Around the late 90s, a lawyer and some others did some digging around as farmers were reporting strange deaths from their farm animals. Turns out, said animals were drinking from a river connected to one of these dumping grounds. The animals' insides had turned rotten from the cancer. The farmer and his family were all at serious risk for cancer as well. They used that for water. This happened to many farmers in the West Virginia area. The lawyer teams do their casework, present it, etc. Trials are pushed back and delayed for nearly 20 years. Then finally, I believe in 2011, DuPont finally faces the music, although if I recall correctly, It was just fines and stuff like that, maybe some arrests, all for a couple $1 billion in yearly profit. Dark Waters is a great movie showcasing these events. Zero tolerance policies in elementary schools just taught kids to interpret rules as black and white as possible into adulthood. Does nothing to meet the situation for what it is, which results in a lot of gaslit children. Antibacterial products in routine use. They're fine for people with compromised immune systems, but their over and misuse have contributed to resistant bacteria. The same thing is true regarding the misuse of antibiotics as a growth enhancer, especially in poultry. When it was discovered that a microscopic dose of tetracycline makes chickens put on weight a bit faster and can be sent to the butcher a couple days earlier, people went nuts. I don't have a problem with the use of antibiotics in livestock if they're sick and need it, but this use is not one of them. Abstinence-only education. Turns out, teens have more unprotected sex when you teach them as little about sex as possible, and kids who don't know anything about sex and boundaries are more vulnerable to child predators. Let's not even get into the harm done to queer kids when the only thing they hear about being queer is it's bad and you better not be. World War II survivorship bias and armoring planes. They looked at all the planes that came back and saw where they were shot up. They started to armor those parts of the planes, but didn't see any effect in the amount of surviving planes, until someone realized that the planes were surviving. They needed to armor the areas that weren't shot, because that's where the fatal shots happened. The planes that were shot in those areas didn't return. Well, California's Proposition 65 said, unless you can provide proof that your product does not cause cancer or reproductive harm, you must add a warning sticker to it. So, the intention was that manufacturers would make sure that their product did not use materials that may cause cancer or cause birth defects, or else they'd have to put this scary label on their item. Then if people see the sticker, they're well informed and may choose a different item. Thus, the manufacturer would have an incentive to make sure their products were safe. Or, manufacturers just bought stickers by the truckload and slapped it on everything, because a 1-cent sticker is cheaper than researching the materials and providing proof that they are safe. So now, every manufacturer does it. And everything you buy in California has that warning, and therefore everybody ignores it. So instead of a warning to consumers for possibly unsafe products, there's basically a law that effectively states you must put a sticker on everything you sell. It means nothing to anyone and everything has a sticker. The sticker now basically means, hey look, I'm a sticker. In California, they made a law that you could only sell handguns that would not fire if the magazine was removed from the gun. This was in response to people ejecting the magazine and forgetting that a round was still in the chamber, then accidentally or negligently firing the round in the chamber. So, seems like a good solution. Make a law that dictates that you can't buy guns unless they are safe when the magazine is out, called a magazine disconnect. So gun manufacturers started to add this feature. But now here's the problem. People now think that guns can't fire when the magazine is not in the gun, but that is not true for the majority of guns. So since the safety feature only exists in half the guns in existence, well, more like 10% really, then people thought that that's how they just work, and so more people were accidentally shooting guns because they thought that since the gun they were familiar was safe with the magazines out, then all guns were. A much better solution was to simply educate people and say, the gun can fire even with the magazine out, and then not try a mechanical kludge that only exists on a handful of models. In 1966, a crew was installing a diverter to increase coolant flow in the cooling system of the Enrico Fermi fast breeder reactor outside Detroit. Instead of helping, it broke loose and blocked coolant flow, causing a near meltdown. The title of the book about the incident was a quote from an engineer. We almost lost Detroit. Putting babies on their stomachs to reduce incidence of cold and flu that led to a material uptick in SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, in many Western countries who adopted this practice. Most Asian countries rightly ignored this advice. Stop for pedestrian laws. I walk a lot and have had people stop for me to cross, no thanks. And I have to play the you go ahead waving game while oncoming traffic is going by, thanks. I would rather wait until I know it's safe to cross rather than assuming that all the drivers are on the same page, because they are not. Forcibly tapering opioid use for pain management to protect the patient from overdose, etc. This became obscenely popular, looking at you, Virginia, after the 2016 CDC opioid pain guideline was released. Now articles are being published showing that persons who were tapered and had their pain treatment stopped, beyond being left in pain by overly zealous cowardly doctors, were at a higher risk of overdose and psychiatric emergencies than if they had their pain treatment with opioids continued. When race cars or motorcycles get too fast, the series responds by cutting horsepower to slow them down. That only works for top speed. It's not just high power that generates a fast lap time. It's also tire grip, suspension, downforce, and everything else that you can think of that generates fast lap times. When only power is reduced, the racers no longer have to brake as hard going into corners, but they have grip in the car that far exceeds the power than it was intended for. All of that causes corner speeds to go way up. You know where crashes normally happen on racetracks? In the corners. So now you hit the wall at higher speeds because the series thought the speeds on the straights were too much. If power is reduced, grip also needs to be reduced, but they almost never try that first.